you've been on receive for pretty much all of the morning. This is your opportunity to transmit now and ask questions. I do have some questions here, and I do have some questions I know will come from the floor as well. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so when you stand up, let us know who you are and what organisation you work with. Ask one question at a time, please. I know some of you will have lots of questions. Ask one question at a time. So the panel will give it their best shot to answer the questions, but you in the audience may also know the answer as well, or be able to offer some advice and guidance to the person asking the question. So please do join in. Don't feel it's restricted to the panel to give all the answers. We're ready to go? Yeah. Okay. So I have the first question. I'm going to kick it off with this. This was submitted via the Survey Monkey link that we sent out earlier, and then we've 2 questions from the audience, and then we'll roll on from there. So the first question is, how can conservation charities move dog walkers from just seeing their sites as functional towards recognising the holistic value of these sites and being willing to contribute to it? Is that okay? How do we move people along? Who's going to volunteer first? Thank you, Dawn.
I don't think it's the full answer, but certainly what Stephen was suggesting earlier, that actually making dog walkers feel welcome and part of that site is part of that journey. I don't think they're going to fully connect and want to get involved if they feel like they're not really welcome in the first place. So I would say that's a good place to start.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that, I mean, I think, to be blunt, it's a very laudable aim, but some people, their probably motivation is they've got a dog and they want to walk that. So my starting point would be saying, actually, can we just deal with things to stop them, promote the good and stop them causing problems? And maybe that person is never going to get that excited about, butterflies or whatever. But we used to see the old interventions where we say, we'll sort this out, we'll do a talk and we'll tell them all about ground nesting birds or waders or something. But actually, as we heard in the last couple of sessions, engaging with people on their terms is good. It's good to make them realise the other impacts that they might have on other people, and it's good to engage with them. But I think actually expecting everyone to also care as much about conservation as people in here do, maybe is a tall order, but at least to engage with them on their terms so it's not causing a problem for the habitat of other people would be my first one, and focus on that.
Thank you. So you're going to have to be a little bit telepathic because I'm going to speak a bit later, and I will deal actually with a couple of these things. So my name is Peter Goldwing, and I apologise I was slightly late this morning, and I missed a bit of Stephen's talk, but I have heard Stephen talk before, and one thing that really struck home to me when he did speak at an event we ran last year was when he talked about actually being really positive towards dog owners, so actually telling people what they can do, not what they can't. And actually, I've tried that idea out of quite a lot of people since I heard Steve talk about it. And I think it is a way to engage people because it's making them think, not in a sort of negative, oh, I'm suddenly the enemy. And believe me, there are a lot of very irresponsible dog owners, I get that. But actually, they kind of engage with the subject suddenly because if you're saying, well, actually, you can go there, but you can't go over there, or please don't go over there because of this or the other, it starts that education dialogue. Don't get me wrong, it's not as simple as that, we've got a hell of a long way to go, but I do think that is a very positive way forward in engaging people.
Just sitting here listening to all of those things, the other thing I think is whether there is some way of actually creating that social interaction with them. So if you are managing a site as a conservation body, what about having some of your rangers with dogs who actually start those conversations with those dog walkers and talk about the work that you're doing? So you're having a conversation about dog walking and also what you're seeing on the site and what you're doing on the site. And the other thought I had, which may be absolute nonsense, but could you do some conservation volunteer days that you can bring your dog along to? And then again, you're starting that conversation and they're starting to see the wider benefits.
Fantastic, folks. Thank you very much. So very much about conversation, very much about engagement. Can, not can't. Do, not don't. This is the key message written across it. Thank you. The next question, and we'll get a microphone to Kathy Thomas from the RSPB. Kathy, yeah? Yeah.
Kelly.
My apologies, Kelly. They give me one simple task to get your name right. Kelly has a question for the panel.
Yeah, my name's Kelly. I'm an ecologist at RSPB. We manage lots of nature reserves across the UK and varying sensitivity for wildlife depending on the species, time of year, etc. And so you're just interested in the panel's thoughts on, is it more appropriate as an organisation to try and have a consistent approach so people know if you go to an RSPB reserve, this is what as a dog owner you might expect in a positive framework or not? Or is it more appropriate that at a local level each site determines how to welcome dog owners and maybe have alternative walking areas, that kind of thing? I'd just be interested in views.
If I start on this one, I think my view is that there should be some clear and consistent messages that you have at a national level, and that may be quite simple, basic principles that can then be expanded on and interpreted at a local level depending on your site. My own view is that if you have different messages at different sites, that's going to be confusing.
I don't have strong feelings about this, but I am going to talk about this a bit later on, where the key thing is information, that people have access to information. So I'm going to be talking a lot about how people with disabilities approach these kind of sites. And for a lot of people, and I'll explain a bit more perhaps later, but it's really critical that they can access that information in advance of coming to a site. So whether it's consistent or not, that may be not quite so critical, but what is critical is that they know before they come exactly how things are going to be and what the layout's going to be, and they can make decisions before coming. And I'll emphasise that a bit more, perhaps in my talk, and I'll give you a few examples and show some slides.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like constituents are all going to agree with each other, but it's absolutely right that there are some things that apply all national messages. So the dog walking code I mentioned earlier on was meant to deal with that, and as Ali rightly said, strip out the terms close control, because that's a really poor term and badly understood. Go on things that are based on outcomes. So that's where there are messages in that which are like your dog not approaching other people or wildlife or their dogs uninvited, which is a good, clear, consistent, apply everywhere message. But then when you have got issues where, for example, on some of your sites, for example in Essex and stuff, where you've got overwintering and passage migrants, where the message at certain times of year is different to where you might have in terms of a heathland site where you've got ground nesting birds. And the people know that there are differences. So it's those national apply everywhere messages, but also what does this mean for me at a local level? Because we also know that it's seasonal. And like with the thing with the sheep worrying, that when the sheep aren't there, you're going to get poor compliance, and then that breeds poor compliance when the signs go up. So national apply all everywhere messages, but also as Peter says, and this is relates to some of the work I know the National Trust is looking at doing, managing expectations before people get to the site. So you might say that you're dog friendly, but what does that mean? Does it mean your dog has to be on a lead? Can it be off a lead? Can you take it into the cafe? Because once people have arrived on your site, then the decision of what they're going to do is actually probably quite made, even if the signage is different. So managing expectations and again helping them do the right thing.
I haven't really got anything to add to that. I think, yeah, you've all covered it exactly as I'd say, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So the information beforehand is as critical, if not more so, than the information on the arrival site. Great. The third question, then, again coming from the floor, is Fiona Murray from Forest Enterprise Scotland. Where are you? Yeah, perfect. The microphone to you.
The telepathy is obviously working because Steve just mentioned going into cafes. I know that lots of you have got visitor centres, cafes, shops and so on, and I just wondered what everybody's thoughts are on, and I hesitate to use the word permitting dogs or letting dogs go in, or just assuming that they can go in, whether people may have cultural or health reasons that they would choose not to be near dogs. Is that something you need to take into consideration? I know it's not exactly an outdoor question, but it's something that I think affects loads.
It's all part of the experience, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got the microphone, I'll start and then I'll sit down. I think in the New Forest we're increasingly seeing that being dog friendly as a cafe or a bed and breakfast accommodation, those kinds of things, has got real financial benefit. But it can also go wrong, and I do think that as organisations, when you look at how sort of questionnaires and things are structured, that people still think that people go to the countryside for a dog walk, and that's all they're doing, whereas increasingly I think that dogs are really part of a family group, and they might not be describing their visit to the countryside as a dog walk. They're actually going out with the family, and the dog is part of their family. So they want those places to go and eat. But again, I think it's about managing those, and I think the word zoning and things comes up quite a lot, but it's about giving people the choice, just as people with dogs want choice about where they can go. People that don't want dogs should have that choice too, and I think that's where management goes wrong, where you've got two people, two kind of user groups clashing because they don't have that choice. So I think, again, it's clear information and understanding sort of changing needs, really.
Yeah, I would say that, as Dawn says, it is clarity of choice. And if we think back a few years when we didn't have the complete smoking ban, where we used to have areas where people could smoke and people couldn't, that's informed choice not for dog owners, but people who choose not to be around dogs for whatever reason. Even people with their own dogs might not. We can't assume just because somebody has a certain demographic, it means that they want somebody else's dog coming up to them. The other thing I would say, if you are providing dog-friendly areas, and just to remind people of the legislation, that there is no, per se, ban on dogs going into where food's being consumed. There are restrictions on where food is being prepared and stored, but actually where it's being consumed, in principle, that's okay. So if you have no dogs areas, that's the choice of the person delivering it. But also, if you're having dog-friendly cafes and stuff, or certain areas of it, use that as an opportunity to also get away your messages about livestock or conservation. So when they're sat at the table or the menu, even there's just some little message about why Dartmoor's a special place, or you come here in spring, great, there's lambs to be born, you might not see the problem, but they could have born. So use it as an opportunity to engage. Don't just say, oh, they can go get a cup of tea or something there, but actually engage with them, because if that's where they're going, that's where they're going to be most receptive to the messages as well.
Okay, so I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle, because obviously I work for an organisation that's involved in training assistance dogs. So assistance dogs technically, under the Quality Act, have public access rights, so they would have the right to go into one of your cafes. But I would always say to my clients, if you don't be responsible about what you're doing with your dog, and actually your dog's badly behaved, which, touch wood, they aren't, and I hope that rarely happens. But I would expect people to actually say, well, actually, your dog isn't welcome here. And I think it's probably the toughest thing for you guys. I used to work in a public building many years ago, and dealing with the public who were being difficult was always the most trickiest thing about the whole job. And so I kind of appreciate it, but I actually think that exactly as people have said, dogs are part of people's families, so if they want to go out. But I think they have to behave in a way that we kind of reasonably expect that actually isn't impinging on other people's enjoyment. And I think people kind of need to be called out on it if they're not. I know that sounds easy, because I think actually that's what I mean. Then it becomes very difficult because people get very confrontational. How dare you insult? My dog is probably worse than insulting a mother or something. But I do think we have to kind of work towards a position where we kind of expect more kind of responsibility and don't actually tolerate behaviour from dogs that is unacceptable. And I'm very happy to explore that idea, and that's a sort of starting point, not an end. But I do think that I would certainly take that position from an assistance dog. Well, as I say, I hope it would never be in any position where you would be calling it out. But I think that's the starting point we should try and work with, really.
We have 4 visitor centres. We don't serve food in those visitor centres. Dogs are very welcome in all of them. It's interesting though, often you will see dogs tied up outside while their owners are inside, and the owner has made a decision not to bring the dog into the visitor centre because they don't feel it's appropriate. For us, it's really important that those dog owners are allowed to come in with their dog if they want to, because it is the point at which we can start that conversation with them and we can start giving them information about the place. Interestingly, we ask people not to bring food and drink into the centres, and quite often people do. So,
And I'm sure there's plenty of lab managers and visitor experience providers in the audience as well. Any successful techniques or approaches from the audience? Anybody wants to add to that?
Yeah, I actually had a thing where I wanted to leave my dog outside, and I felt it was pretty good. And you get actual staff like saying, "Oh, come on, bring your dog in, calling your dog in." And actually, no, I'm in charge of my dog, and that's what I would choose. So also that's kind of different.
Sure. Thanks very much. Put your hand up behind as well.
Yeah, I manage a National Trust site, and we've got a lot of dogs, I think in the UK, a lot of dogs, and we have a tea room. Thank you. We have a tea room and we have areas zoned, and on the tables there are stickers if it's a no dog table or a dog table. We have water bowls, we have dog parking zones outside for those people that don't want to take their dog into the cafe as well. And also around our toilet block, we've got parking zones for dogs around the toilet block, so we're very welcoming but also considerate of people who don't want to bring their dogs in or don't want to sit near other dogs. So we try and manage everyone's expectations, and I think we do it quite well.
Thank you very much. There's another hand twitching over here, I think, for that, was there? Or just somebody scratching their ear? That's okay. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's another way of looking at this as well, which is the assumption that actually, for example, going into a busy cafe space where there's lots of things going on is actually something that dogs want to do. And everyone will kind of know their dog and know their dog's limitations, but actually dogs aren't used to being suddenly in those kinds of environments. It can be a very quite a scary place to be. And so the right for someone to say, no, actually, I think I'd rather stay outside with my dog, or I'd rather tie my dog up here, or whether people they want to stay with the dog or whatever, but actually sometimes respecting the fact that they realise that actually going into that environment could be quite stressful for their dog. And it may not be if it's a really quiet tea room, but actually it's a really busy place with lots of things going on. It's not necessarily an environment that a dog feels comfortable with. So we kind of always tend to look at these things from a human perspective. Sometimes it's quite good to look at it from the dog's perspective.
Yeah, so Peter's sort of touched on what I wanted to say really. I spend a lot of time going to puppy classes, and I spend a lot of time hanging out with dog trainers these days. Now, I think we really need to, I guess, empower dog owners to feel confident about what's best for their dog and to know what's best for their dog. I was invited to bring my dog along to this conference this weekend. Well, it's not weekend, is it? But these 2 days. I know that he wouldn't be able to cope with that, as lovely as it would have been to have him here, and as great as it would have been to be able to demonstrate and say, oh, look at my perfect ranger dog, why don't you follow him on Twitter? In actual fact, I would have been having a complete meltdown nightmare, because he's a young Cocker Spaniel and he gets hyperactive quite quickly. So although he's had a lot of training, he goes what was described quite often as going over the threshold quite quickly, and I know it would be too much for him. So it was about me having the confidence to say, that's really lovely, I would love to bring him, but that's not right for him, whereas another dog it might be appropriate for. And I think going back to training, that, and even when we're out and about, there's so much peer pressure on dog owners. And when we talk about having dogs on leads, I spend a lot of time with people saying it's okay to have your dog on a lead. And I think we really worry about the fact that people want their dogs to be exercised off leads, and that's great, but it isn't always appropriate for that dog. And it might be that the best way for that person, it might be that they're in their training journey, and the best way to manage their dog is to have it on a lead, whether that's a long line or a short line. But actually they get a lot of pressure from sort of peer pressure from other dog owners going, no, you've got to keep your dog on a lead or whatever. And so people feel like they actually need to let their dog off when actually they're not really comfortable in doing so. So I think actually back to basics and going back to those kind of dog training things and actually saying, you know, this is right for your dog, and actually it is okay to not let somebody pet your dog because they're training, or not do this. It's okay to say no.
Thank you. Just a couple of catch-ups on that. If people can't take their dogs inside, just a couple of quick points. Thinking of what that might mean in terms of the summer, that is it more likely then that people are going to leave their dogs in hot cars, and how you manage that, or have the appropriate messaging to just make sure, because potentially people say, well, I couldn't take my dog in because of the nasty whatever council it was, and then, you know, they do need to take responsibility for the dog in the car, but you can see that train of thought. So actually if there's some messaging also about dogs not being left in hot cars is important. And the other thing, as Ali was saying, that people will tie their dogs up outside trying to do the right thing. But what you can end up is that people who don't want to be around dogs or don't want to be them for various reasons end up running the gauntlet to get into the visitor centre. So actually thinking about where those tie-ups are, as you're saying, really good practice from the National Trust in terms of toilets and stuff, but thinking about where they are, they need to be somewhere that's visible so people aren't too concerned about their dogs being stolen, but also to make sure that you're not making all these dogs go to the entranceway and somebody wants to come in and out, doesn't want to be around the dog. The dog owner's trying to do the right thing, but actually ends up making it worse for other people.
Great. Some great perspectives there. Do you have a separate question or something to add to that? Yeah, work away. That's great.
Hi, my name's Rachel Forsyth. So I've just taken on the role of Dogs Welcome Project Manager in the National Trust. So I am the National Trust's dog person. Please don't, yeah. There's quite a few people who've already come up to me. So yeah, just to kind of add to that. So from your point about the RSPB and kind of managing different offers effectively at your different places. Oh wow, come and see us. Like it's kind of total chaos. Like there are some buildings, places like Allenbank in the Lake District where your dog can go inside, can go in the whole house. There are other places like Anglesey Abbey in East of England where, you know, it's a garden, you can't take your dog in at all. You can take them in some cafes, you can't in others. And I don't see a situation in the future where necessarily that changes, certainly in the near future. I don't think that's going to change too much. We're always going to have a really different offer. And to some extent, that's a really good thing, but we just need to be pushing people to the right places where they can have a great day out. So I think that consistency of message is really key. I'd really advocate having dogs in catering, kind of tea rooms and cafes. For that, one of the things that's come out of asking our staff about why it's important that dogs are allowed in places is about keeping a family together. So quite often, you know, dad will stand outside whilst mum goes in with the two kids and is then trying to negotiate them grabbing cakes, and it just feels like a more stressful outing when that happens. So actually keeping that family group together, who are then more likely to stay and dwell longer and have a nicer time and spend more money. So there's a definite, and you know, but there is a definite benefit in our kind of commercial outlets of taking advantage of this audience. And when 50% of our audience in an outdoor place might be coming with the dogs, but you're going to cut off a massive amount of your income if you're not welcoming. So, yeah, really important.
Fantastic, thank you. Great, well, a wealth of things to consider there about whether dogs go into our visitor experiences or our cafes, both from the owner's perspective, from the dog's perspective, indeed, and of course from the landowner visitor experience provider. So thanks very much for your answers, and thanks very much for the insights on the floor as well, and I encourage that as well as we move through the session. Any other questions from the floor? Great, plenty of hands going up. This gentleman here, Jim. Yeah, I'll come to you guys down here next. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kit from the Forestry Commission. I was just wondering, kind of picks from Peter's point about challenging unacceptable behaviour, how you target the few and not the many. We get a lot of dog owners who are really responsible, but we get a few who are kind of ruining it for everyone else, and how you enforce that like a public estate, because inevitably by the time something's been reported, and a ranger or whoever gets out there, the dog owner's gone, or, you know, the situation's going to diffuse itself. So this is how you, it's been good to get the kind of thoughts on that.
I think everyone can really sympathise with you, and I think that really is the crux of why we've been managing the way we have, in that it is very difficult to kind of just target those ones. So we just go, oh well, we'll put a ban, or, you know, this happens, and it is, like you say, the few. But at the same time, if putting these blanket bans in was working, then we wouldn't be having these conversations today. So I don't think it's the answer. I think it's about using the appropriate legislation, which I'm sure Steve can dwell on further. So I'd say it's probably, the answer's not necessarily easy, but I would say that is the route that we need to go, rather than just basically saying, oh well, we'll just put a ban. One of the things that I've been talking with guys in the Brecon Beacons about actually is about twisting messaging to actually start normalising positive behaviour. So there's a lot of things about sort of like peer pressure and things, and the example I gave outside about like dog fouling, where we used to go out with sticks and say, look at this, 126 dog poos. In fact, there's probably more, but I've run out of flags now. Isn't it awful? And actually, the message to that dog owner is, oh yeah, this is really awful. What's the point of me picking up this 126 dog poos? Whereas actually, if you start normalising, actually, most people are picking up, and people tend to want to go with the crowd. So starting to promote the positive and then dealing with the odd ones that are doing the negative, as opposed to always dwelling on the negative, I think, is a way forward with sort of behavioural change work.
Yeah, it is absolutely a challenge, and supporting what Dawn said. I think what I'm focused on, there was some research done jointly by the Kennel Club and Natural England, again in Southern England by the University of Portsmouth, and that identified what was most influential on dog owner behaviour. And we'd like to think it was, I don't know, the Kennel Club or the council or the rangers, but it was actually their peer group, what other dog walkers were doing. And particularly because the other dog walkers are the other people that are most likely to see them. And some of that work spawned a project in Falkirk in central Scotland called Green Dog Walkers. And there you'd got, as you say, the responsible majority getting really annoyed by people not picking up after their dogs. And so they developed this scheme where actually they had sort of armbands and worked with the council, and they had this thing where they had tents and they got cubs or scouts and brownies and all those sort of things, and people would come with their dog and they would sign this pledge to always pick up, and then their dog, if you're a dog owner you get this, if you're not a dog owner you think it's crazy, but the dog had a little ink thing and the dog kind of signed it as well. But they acted as visual ambassadors, and they offered a bag, and it was not confrontational, but the fact that the dog owners were out there and they knew that their peer group, because if you say something, you're just going to get cast as, oh, the terrible forestry commissioner or whatever, as reasonable as we know you are. That's the difficulty. So actually working with that peer group, not suggesting a vigilante type approach, although sometimes you could think that might be better. But the Durham Falkirk Council found they actually had to install more bins because the picking up was a lot better. So working with the peer group as well, because often the difficulty is you get branded with being the dog hater or the mountain bike hater or the barbecue hater, where actually no, that's not the case, but developing, as Dawn was saying, those relationships for them to be your advocates. And tomorrow I'll talk to you about commercial dog walking, actually saying, yes, some of those can be a problem, but those can also be a really good conduit to the dog owners. And also working with vets as well, and getting the information at the right place. We're always going to have some of those awkward people, and then the other key thing to remember is that when we look at some of those things, those people are also probably on the radar with the police and social services. You know, we find that there's a lot of links between bad dog welfare and keeping can actually just be symptomatic of a lot of other social issues going on in that person's life. So actually, again, another multidisciplinary approach would be really helpful there.
Thanks, Tim. I think there's a kind of big picture and a small picture to this. On the big picture, which is kind of beyond what we can control in this room, but I do really think that we need to be thinking a bit more seriously about the whole education side of getting people to really understand what they're taking on when they have a dog. One of the projects that we run, and I'll talk about it a bit later on, but I'll just talk about it briefly now because it's probably more relevant here than it is later actually, is a project called our Family Dog Service. And we work with families who have children with autism who want to get who want to either have or wanting to get a pet dog. And we take them through what is effectively a kind of responsible dog ownership program over 3 days where they come and there's a period in between and we help them think about, well, why do you want to have a dog? Because they've heard that a dog would be good for children with autism, so get a dog. And then we help them think about, well, if you're going to get a dog, what kind of breeds are appropriate to how you live and your family and what you want. So really get people to think about, before they get dogs, what they're going to do and why they do it. And it's extraordinary because people come, they've got a child who's obviously struggling with all sorts of things, and they come up with the most crazy ideas about the breeds that they think are going to work for them. And if they do that, they are going to be exactly the people who are going to come to your places and cause trouble, because it's just wrong. They don't live in the right environment for the sort of dogs they think about. So there's a massive kind of education thing that we need to do on a much bigger picture, really, to get people to really understand dogs and what's the kind of right dog for them. But on that sort of slightly more micro level, which you control a bit more. My personal view is that we should work on the assumption of kind of wider access, and that would be the good thing to do. But that actually, but when we're giving out information, for example, we're not just saying necessarily dogs welcome, but perhaps we're
being asked that all the time by our farmers. Why don't you put gory pictures of sheep that have been eaten by dogs? And I say it's the wrong thing to do. But I pose the question, are some of the people who are walking dogs, would they relate to that message more than a cuddly message? I don't know.
Any comments on that one? A hand straight up there, perfect. Yeah. We'll get a microphone to you. Yeah. Thank you.
My name's Scott Ashworth, I work for the MOD, but I'm commenting probably on a personal perspective for this one. So Stephen mentioned the Falkirk Green Dog Walkers Initiative. I actually stay in Falkirk, and yeah, that's been a resounding success. I don't have a dog at the moment, but I did have a dog, and the difference in dog walking behaviour, I think, during the course of that campaign has been noticeable, and that actually followed on, I think, from quite a hard-hitting poster campaign as well, of images of toddlers basically putting their hands in dog faeces, or simulated dog faeces clearly, but that seemed to have the right effect, I think, and it's been noticeable in the district that campaign has worked.
Any other observations on that one before we move on? Sorry.
Hi, Carrie Westgarth. I'm going to be talking tomorrow a little bit about who views themselves as a responsible dog owner and how we construct these ideas of responsibility. And I think part of the problem is everybody thinks they are a responsible dog owner, and then we don't see that what we are doing is irresponsible because there are justifications for the way we behave. In our own minds, we can construct reasons why perhaps that gate was left open or things like that. And also, with this idea of, so what you're talking about there in terms of whether we should try and use more shock tactics to target people, this is what's known in psychology and behaviour change as fear appeals. They do work in some instances, but they can backfire. They can make people close themselves off to the idea of behaviour change even more, and normally they're the people that you actually really want to target. So, yeah, I'm not saying more, but hopefully we can bring up some of these discussions again tomorrow when I'm doing my presentation and explain to you what I've found through research with dog owners, how they construct that idea of responsibility and how we might then be able to tackle that practically in changing their behaviour.
Okay, Karen, thank you very much. We'll look forward to that tomorrow, indeed. We had another question down here. Anybody else any comments on that topic? Or are we moving on to another question? One last comment on that topic, and we'll move on. We'll come to a new question down here then, okay?
Hi, Sam Lou from the Wash and Norfolk Marine Partnership. It's a comment on best practice, actually from other activities who need to communicate best practice as well. And it's a comment on what you said about the full range of recreational use of wildlife. And so it also, in terms of the consistency of messaging, it's tremendously important. I work with a whole range of environmental NGOs across the coastline. They're all trying to communicate the same message, but all saying it differently. And language is enough of the minefield as it is, without having to try and muddle all these messages together. But in terms of other recreational uses, yachting and sailing is the example I'm going to give. That can also have a detrimental impact on wildlife, and the Royal Yachting Association is very much taken the bull by the horns with this, and they use membership fees to employ an officer to start to develop a nationally consistent message by working with 4 pilot sites across the UK. And it's had a tremendously positive impact on the sailing community and positive engagement with them. And I don't know whether something equivalent to that is happening with dog walking at a national scale, but it feels like there's a real potential for it. But it needs a national body to take the ball by the horns and say, right, we'll raise the funds and we'll work locally with local communities to make sure what we're developing nationally is regionally appropriate. Is this happening? Is there potential for it? Is there a national dog walking body you can start to look to deliver this kind of national work?
Thank you.
I don't know if there is a national body. Stephen might be better placed. But my view is that it shouldn't just be one body, it should be a partnership of all those people who are interested, so that the message is much stronger.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sam. And in fact, the dog walking code that I mentioned, how many people had heard of the dog walking code when I mentioned it? So maybe about half of you. That's very interesting. Because that was the idea that, as Ali said, it needs everybody to join in to agree to these messages, national messages, but actually then work out what that means at a local level. And unfortunately, yes, I can say it because I'm independent, it was a real shame that in Wales a little bit of promotion was done on that to help raise profile, but in England the view was taken by people a long way from Natural England who were very supportive of it, that we'll stick it on the gov.uk website, and then if people want to find it, then they can use that. And really, you know, to me that's a really missed opportunity. But from the Kennel Club's point of view, and the thing that I think Sam made there, that was something that was being delivered through the yachting community. And I think that's really important to work with those partners. It can seem harder. It's very easy to tick the box and say, oh, we've done a leaflet, then that's fine. But actually, certainly the Kennel Club, with a number of the things you've heard today, will endorse those, even if we can't be as active a partner. But there are also local dog groups that I know Dawn's working with as well, that actually work with them and make the dog owners, remembering that it's, you know, a very wide range of views, but make them part of the solution rather than seeing them as just part of the problem. But there aren't the easy answers. I'd be retired now and floating around on a yacht if they were. But it's actually work with what you've got, and I think that's the thing that's significantly different. Yes, I can remember when I was a rights away officer, user groups can be kind of scary and they've got views and stuff, but they're still going to have those views. So actually engage with those and work with them. But they can become your best allies. And in fact, Dawn's been a wee bit too modest, but in the New Forest, just after Fulton Mount, there were hugely bad relationships between dog owners and the National Park and the Forestry Commission, and that's really been turned around to the point where, is it right that they're actually talking about funding a ranger post? This is the dog owners.
This is my talk tomorrow.
Oh, right, sorry, bring out one.
I'm only joking. But yeah, absolutely.
But just to make that point that actually, again, stuff, as Sam says, coming from that community, to be honest, we can polish some of the stuff that we've done, but actually, as Ali says, it's more nuanced, and do we need to do some new and different things? Keep the stuff that's working, but say, if there's this group that we need to target, then that maybe needs a different approach. And sorry, Dawn, for nicking your talk.
No, that's okay, it's absolutely fine. But yeah, I would say, you know, really seeing it, the more I've become immersed with dog trainers, as I say, there's a huge gap between somebody getting a dog and the money standing responsibilities. It's sort of what Peter was saying, and there doesn't seem to be a really obvious way that we can get that message out. And like I say, Kennel Club's got a role to play in that. We have a role to play in that. People setting up as dog trainers have a role to play in that. And at the moment, that's an unregulated industry. Wouldn't it be lovely if everybody that went to puppy classes had a session where I went along, no, not me, but somebody went along and said, great, your dog knows how to sit, your dog knows how to give a paw, roll over and do all these things, but actually you know how to behave with your dog in the outside. At the moment, there isn't a consistent place for that information. I think that's sort of what you're describing in a way, is that there isn't a consistent message to dog owners, and they have got to kind of root through different ways to find out actually what their responsibilities is. It's very easy for somebody to get a dog and think it's all going to be fun, and they buy the fluffy puppy and they don't understand the realities of it, and I don't know, it would be great, I think, to have something.
One last comment, David.
Yeah, just to add. So some of you are probably familiar with the Kennel Club Good Citizen Training Scheme, where you've got bronze, silver and gold. We're just working at the moment in outdoor modules on that. And one of the things that you might be able to help is outdoor training venues, but that's going to embed what actually this stuff means in the outdoors, not just how you train it, but knowing when you would have your dog on a lead. I mean, you're always going to pick up, but actually so applying that in the outdoors. So as Caroline said this morning, there's over 1,000 Good Citizen Training Scheme clubs throughout the UK, and that's something that we're looking to roll out. But again, it's making those wider connections as well, and working with the trainers.
And one of the sessions tomorrow as well, actually the last session tomorrow, the legacy of this conference is looking at how we can maybe work in collaboration and move things forward. So maybe hold that thought. There's some really good ideas there for collaboration and consistency of message, consistency of approach. So hold that thought and don't forget it for the session tomorrow afternoon. I'd be keen to capture that, or other ideas indeed that may come forward. more, but there's certainly a great thread of thought there as we move forward. So, I had another question down here. You've been patiently waiting. Thank you very much.
So, mind if I just add before we move on? Sorry, I caught the mic. Joe dived it. I just add to that before we move on from the kind of idea of the national message. I've worked for Natural Resources Wales, and I've done a lot of work sort of promoting Countryside Code in Wales. It has been a kind of quite difficult process to go through. From when Crow was first implemented, we had a budget, or England and Wales had a budget of £500,000 a year for promotion. Sorry. Anyway, ignore that. And every year it's gone down. You know, we have a duty under Crow to issue a code. We both ourselves and Natural do. We don't have a duty to do anything else. And every time it kind of gets eroded away, this kind of idea of the responsible message. And so it's just a small portion of the work that we do. The idea of trying to gauge something or get something that generates funds, it's a partnership work and can add and grow and be owned by everyone, is, I think, a really great idea, because if it's left just to the public sector, and I'm saying that from the public sector, we do have a habit to sort of start off with a great idea, but things get undercut, priorities change, and there's no consistency. So that's just something I would add to that.
Thank you very much, John. Here we go.
Yeah, no pressure. I'm Hayley Taylor from Medway Council, and I run a project called Birdwise, which is all about mitigating recreational disturbance. And one of the things that we found in the year that we've been running, we're getting really good results with dog walkers so far. We haven't really ploughed into that yet, but we're getting really negative responses from what I'd class as the birding community. Has anybody had any success? I mean, I'll give you an example. Our rangers approached a lady who was walking her dog responsibly and said, you know, well done, it's lovely to see a dog being walked on a lead, does he walk lovely? And she said, oh, look, that's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me on this site. She said, I've been walking here for years, I get nothing but grief from people with binoculars, and my dog's really well behaved. She said, I've asked people questions, they're rude to me. So has anybody had any experience of how you can turn around the perceptions of those that are not the dog community to try and welcome them?
Specifically bird watchers then as well as a key piece for yourself, from yourselves, or indeed anything from the floor? Okay. We're going to microphone to Terry. Who needs a microphone? You've got Terry. Great.
I'm Terry Robinson, I'm chairman of the Outdoor Recreation Network. I want to come back to, this is going to be relevant, but it's not going to take 6 minutes and 40 seconds. But I want to come back to what Mike said first thing this morning, the Outdoor Recreation Network vision, to encourage more people to enjoy and engage with the outdoors. We can't do that, but it depends on the people who own and manage and possess the land. And in order to deliver that vision, the people who invite or have people on their land have to provide the facilities and the services that make them feel welcome, and that means delivering facilities and services of quality. And that is a lot about what the Outdoor Recreation Network is about. I was talking last night with James Ogilvie, who's just come back from California, poor chap, and we were saying how incredibly fortunate we are in this country, because if you go to most other countries, they don't have what we've got. They've got, in America, there's a national park, you can go into it, and that's all right. But most places you can't go, and most countries work on a basis as, I own this land, it's mine, keep off. The genius of what we've achieved in this country is that magic expression, shared land use, multiple land use. And I think what I've been thinking about this afternoon in talking about, conservation bodies owning land, farmers owning land, we expect them all to welcome people onto it if we're going to subscribe to this vision of the Outdoor Recreation Network. But we don't expect, we expect farmers to welcome people, but we don't expect that if they welcome us, we've got to know all about farming and subscribe to the farming ethos. Just the same way, if we're a conservation body, we're just another land occupier. We welcome people onto that land. We don't necessarily expect that they're going to subscribe to and join in with the vision of the type of land husbandry that we're doing, which is rather similar to what the farmers are doing, just husbanding a different crop. We don't expect foresters to do anything other than to welcome people onto their land, but we don't have to become subscribers to the forestry vision. So I want us to really focus on the fact that it's about multiple land use and shared occupation. And I think our messaging, and I'm at the point which is the point, the messaging has got to come from that origin. It's that we all share this, and I'm here to do my bit, and I'll tell you about it if you're interested, but you're welcome to do your bit. And I think sharing is much more about seeing where other people come from and seeing and respecting that they might be there for a different reason. If you're welcoming onto the land, they might be there for different reasons, the reason why you're actually owning the land. So I really treasure this thing about multiple land use and shared occupation. And I think that has to colour the whole way we message everything we want to say to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for focusing our minds there. We talked about any specific actions or any specific case studies anybody has in the audience even around the interaction between dog walkers and bird watchers indeed. So 2 hands, we'll take one here and then this lady over here, we'll go to you next. Thank you.
Hi, Alison from the National Trust again. So we have lots and lots of dog walkers, we also have a lot of bird watchers, and I think it's consistency in messaging. So we have expectation of bird watchers when it's the nesting period to not hang around the nesting areas so much, do not disturb the parents trying to feed the young, but also for the dog owners, it's dogs on leads, don't let them run through the heather. So it's just having messages for each group targeted for the impact they can be having, just so you're not showing any sort of favouritism, because I've had it thrown back at me when I'm talking to a bird watcher. What about all these people with the dogs and dog walkers? What about that guy standing with binoculars? So it's just knowing the message you want to give them and being consistent in the sort of rules, really, is what I suggest.
Thank you very much. There's one more hand here, just this lady here.
Hi, it's Pippa Langford from Natural England. It's not an example about dogs and dog walkers and bird watchers, but there was a lot of antagonism between horse riders and mountain bikers and cyclists. So you might be familiar with the Be Nice, Say Hi campaign. If you haven't seen it, Google it. And there's lots of video material about how horse riders and cyclists can interact in a safe way, which you might find useful. It's just, be nice to each other. What a revelation.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I was going to say something very similar. It's not bird watchers and walkers, but it's cyclists and walkers on cycleways. And there was a campaign around share this space. And actually I think something around sharing that space and the bird watchers and the walkers sharing that space together and enjoying it together could be a way of actually doing that together. So not exactly relevant, but similar.
Hi, Adam Murray from the RSPB. We obviously have a lot of bird watchers, which is interesting. And I just wanted to make the point of building on those that I come from, I'm not a birder, I'm one of those people, but within our organisation we do get a lot of people who are either a bird watcher or I like dogs and never the twain shall meet. But actually, the point is that I do the visitor experience side of stuff in our nature reserves in Eastern England. Every single person has the right to come onto our nature reserves if they're doing the right thing, being well behaved, And it's very, very difficult because we've had hundreds of years of people sitting there saying, but I'm a bird watcher, you're the RSPB, we're your main target audience, we're the special ones, everyone else they're outsiders. So actually challenging everyone's perception about what it is to come out to, for example, an RSPB nature reserve, that's the key, is actually challenging that and actually saying when people are doing good behaviour, that's great. When people are doing negative behaviour, then pick people up on that, as we mentioned before. So I think that came together with a campaign that we've just been running recently called Share Our Shores, which is all about little tern colonies we've had on the North Norfolk coast, and that was all about getting people to realise that it's here for people, it's here for wildlife, it's here for your dogs as well. But please just do the right thing by everybody, and I say be nice. So I think it totally works, and that approach and actually challenging perceptions is the way forward. So,
yeah, just to come up on the issue of perceptions as well, when we're talking about the traffic light system that Ali mentioned as well, about where we clean, whether an area is on lead, no dogs, or dogs can be off lead, and making sure those transitions, that you show those when you're going from an on-lead to an off-lead area, are also important for the visitors, because we find that, just as you were saying, perception, some people will see somebody walking a dog on signage that says National Nature Reserve or something, say their perception could be that dog shouldn't really be here. And so if the visitors are not aware of what's expected of the dog owners, that just fuels, more conflict. You will look online and say, well, there's a law here that says dogs should be on the lead everywhere in the countryside. And in fact, we see, with concerns about sheep worrying, some of those messages being perpetrated by various well-meaning groups, but then you've got the cattle farmers saying, no, we want the bit that says release your dog so that somebody doesn't get killed. So there's all these, again, it's coming back to which is what the dog walking code tried to do, between the best efforts of lots of people, including NRW and Natural England, to be clear that everybody has a legitimacy here, but there's also legitimacy to be responsible and a legitimacy to behave in irresponsible ways. But it is, as Terry was saying, about sharing. But communicating about where dog owners can go and what they can do, the key thing is that's helping other people recognise the legitimacy of people visiting in certain ways and certain times.
Thank you. We have time for... Can I just make one comment first?
Very quick. Coming back to what Peter said about, don't believe everything you hear about conflict. It might be buried away in Natural England archive now, or they might have thrown it away, but when I was a working man, we did some research in the recreation bit that I was responsible for on shared use of cycleways by cyclists, horse riders and walkers. And we looked at conflict and where the conflict was. If you interview people, they said it was terrible. They were all conflicting with each other, and cyclists frightened walkers, and horse riders, were annoying to everyone. And then we sent out the same researchers with a video camera, and they filmed what was going on, and then they would film an interaction between the different classes of users, and then they'd go and interview them and say, terribly sorry, can I just have a quick word with you? You've just had a cyclist cycle past you. What do you think? Did it cause any problems? There was very, very hard for them to find any conflict, even to the extent, although they reported, in the safety of an interview, it's all very conflict-stricken. But to the extent they couldn't find conflict, that sometimes when they interviewed people and said, that cyclist just came past you, did it give you any problems? And they would say, what cyclist? So don't believe everything you hear about conflict.
Thank you, Terry. There's a hand up over here, I think. Yeah. We'll get a microphone to you, I think. Just shout. Sorry.
Denise Bird, I look after a community woodland down in North Kent. And we've had a lot of issues and conflicts around dogs in the last 10 years. But one of the crux of the issues that I've only really come to understand in the last few years, and I don't know if there is any answers, is if a lot of the bad behaviour or the conflicts aren't caused by people who are purposely being belligerent or difficult. They just really don't realise the impact that their behaviour of their dog may be having on someone else. So they may not realise that by allowing their excitable lab dog to run up to a toddler or another nervous dog, it's causing a problem. And it's really, if anybody could come up with any ideas of how we get people to put themselves in the position of that other person, see it from their point of view, I think that's why we always manage to get that across. Things like the fabulous cartoon or fabulous campaign gets people to see it from the other person's point of view. So that the behaviour of their dog, which they see as just not problematic, they can actually see the positive according to the other person.
Thank you. One last comment on this, and we're going to take one last question now before we move to tea and coffee.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Des Payne from the British Horse Society. I'm that horsey bloke at the back. But actually, just to answer your question, we're within the motoring industry and the same conflicts there. So last year we launched from Parliament on the 13th of June dead or dead slow virtual reality footage, and that puts the car driver in a position of being a horse rider. And it's an educational process of, seeing the horse react when they go past fast and too close, but also then having the educational message then what to do. So virtual reality is quite big. It is expensive, but actually that's one way we're putting our message out there within the car industry.
Thank you very much. Okay, one last topic before we break for coffee. Anybody else any burning questions from the floor? There's one over here. We've got a microphone to you.
Hi, I'm Carly Howard, Hampshire County Council. So I am the sort of trainee dog lady of Hampshire County Council. I'm not quite the top dog lady yet. So I really see the work that we need to do is on a big scale. I think there's lots of good work going on, but it's in silos and it's not joined up thinking. But how do you get that joined up thinking? Because I work on a partnership project and we still have issues with some partners putting PSPOs because they think they're good. Not understanding that displacement issue. I want to work across the whole of Hampshire. How do I get everybody involved? Because I work closely with Dawn, I work with the South Downs. We all do our bits, but I want everyone involved. How?
That's a nice easy one to finish with for you.
No, go ahead, you can start.
Okay, let me just... I know, literally, just from a national park point of view, we have to... Everything we do, we're a relatively new national park, the New Forest, sort of 12, 13 years old at the most. So when we came in, we were another organisation amongst a whole load of organisations, some of which dated back 1,000 years, the murderers and such like that. So I think it's making sure you have the opportunities for dialogue in the first place. We have a dogs forum, which I'll talk a bit about tomorrow. It's not the be-all and end-all, and I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems, but at least if we get people in the same room having the same conversations. I think it's sharing best practice and things like this, and I think it's a case of we're not going to change it overnight, and there's not a definite answer, but the more we talk to each other and the more we sort of understand it. But there's one thing that I think is really coming out from all of these discussions is that actually, dog walkers are just one user group in a whole load of shared sort of recreational and conservation space. And we could easily be sat here having a conference about mountain bikers, or we could be sitting here having a conference about horse riders. And I think the reason dog walkers kind of get sort of pushed up the agenda is because we're aware it's just the number of them. They're not necessarily more of a problem. It's just there are so many, which is a really good thing. So I think there's a common, the fact there's all of us sat here today, but there's a common sort of desire to sort of move things forward, and it's finding the right people to speak about and finding the right way forward. But I think Steve's got all the answers.
Thank you. I would look to Carly, because Carly's been quite modest. Hampshire County Council have done a really lot of brilliant groundbreaking work over 15 odd years. So it's actually, you've set quite a high bar to do better anyway. I think the key thing that strikes me, which I normally say first, and that's what I haven't, but this isn't dog management at all. This is people management. And just as the point was making, just as much as whether it's horse riders or cyclists or mountain bikers or all these people, who are doing bad things, the thing that strikes me is that traditionally, as Dawn said, this is half of all your visitors, and that's quite a big thing to get hold of. And it's not a homogenous group either. But actually build those partnerships, and as we'll hear from Carrie and some other people, actually, just like we were saying, we're never going to turn dog walkers into being necessarily all really keen birders. But think about what's their particular agenda. And if it's in terms of saying, well, this is a project to promote better human health, or if it's to the council, which, mentioning no names, displaced all the dog walkers onto the SPA, actually working around, because the solutions come from people from these. It's not to do with the dogs at all and making those connections. The other thing I would say as well when we have these things is look for incremental improvements. We're never going to get perfection. But I've seen it in places like Hampshire and other places, incrementally it getting better. But it's different challenges all the time, as Alan was saying. We've done that bit, got it pretty much there, but actually we need to look at other things. But it's a people management issue, both in terms of the people with the dogs, but also the partners. And it is a frustration to me that when we look at certain areas, we can see changing the behaviours of the dogs, but actually see some of the bigger challenges to stop things getting worse are with the partner authorities, and particularly things like public spaces protection orders, that councils, which do have a duty under the biodiversity to think about the impacts on nature conservation